Buddha says we suffer because of ignorance, and he defines ignorance as ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, not seeing things in terms of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering. Now, for anyone who has read much about Buddhism, or not even all that much, you probably read about the Four Noble Truths. And you can notice, though, that you're still suffering. So what does the Buddha mean by saying that you know the Four Noble Truths, or know in terms of the Four Noble Truths? To begin with, you don't just know the truth, you know that there are duties to be done with each truth. The truth of suffering is to be comprehended. And comprehension means that you really understand it to the point where you have no more passion, aversion, and delusion around suffering. You know, say, I'm not passionate about my suffering. But there's a lot that we don't understand about why we suffer. That's what we've got to comprehend. The duty with regard to the cause of suffering is that you abandon it. The cessation of suffering is something you want to realize. In other words, you want to see the truth of it, and you can see its truth. You actually experience the truth of the cessation of suffering by performing the duty of the fourth truth, which is to develop the path. Okay, so now you know the duties, but even more than knowing the duties is to know that they've been done. That's when you really know the Four Noble Truths, really see things in terms of the Four Noble Truths. The image the Buddha gave us of a wheel. Back in those days when you had a table with different variables on it, and you went through all the variables, he called it a wheel. In this case, you have the Four Noble Truths, and you have 3 levels of knowledge. You know the truth, you know the duties to be done, and then you know that you completed the duties. So 4 truths, 3 levels of knowledge, 12 permutations. That's the wheel. And it's only when the wheel is complete that you can actually use it well. In the meantime, that we kind of hobble around with what we do now. For example, to comprehend suffering, the Buddha says there's the suffering of birth, aging, illness, and death. Those are things we know. Of being separated from what we love, of having to live with things we don't love, that we know. Of not getting what we want, that's something we also know. But then he says what all those forms of suffering have in common is 5 clinging aggregates: form, feeling, perceptions, thought constructs, and consciousness. That's something that's less familiar. You say, how can I know about suffering if it's something I'm not familiar with? Well, the Buddha says the clinging is the real problem. And he says we cling in 4 ways, and when you listen to the types of clinging, you'll recognize them as things that you really do cling to. First is sensuality, your fascination with thinking about sensual pleasures. That's how a lot of us get our pleasures in life. You see people working, and as long as there's a song they can sing or listen to, or some sensual pleasure that they keep in mind, it makes the work go a lot faster, a lot more easily. Sensuality for them is what makes life worth living. So that is something people really do cling to. Then there are their views about the world, what you think about how the world works. Maybe the world of politics, the world of science, or just your general views about the world. That's our sense of reality. We hold to that too, because it's within that reality that we're going to try to find happiness. The more confident you are in how you understand the world, the more you're going to cling to that. Then they're clinging to what the Buddha calls habits and practices, your ideas of how things should be done, how things should not be done. And we hold very strongly to those ideas as well. And finally, your idea of yourself, who you are, what you are, whether you're your body, whether you have a self that owns the body, whether you identify with your consciousness, identify with your thinking. This idea of who you are, the world you're in, and how you should behave in the world to find pleasure. These are things we cling to very strongly. What the Buddha is saying, that these four things that we cling to are actually made up of those aggregates he talked about. The sense of your body, as you feel it from within, that's form. Feelings of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. Perceptions, the labels you put on things to give them meaning. Like with a stoplight. You see the red and you tell yourself, well, that's red. And then what's the meaning of red? Well, it means you should stop. And there's a question of how important the light is. You come to a stoplight at an intersection, you say, this is very important, I really do have to stop. Red, stop, important. Those are labels, those are perceptions. They give meaning to things. And then there are thought constructs, the way we put our thoughts together. And finally, consciousness, which is aware of all these things. If it weren't for the activity of consciousness, you wouldn't be able to do any of these other things. And our sense of the world, our sense of ourself, our sense of what should be done and what kind of pleasures we want, all these things are made up out of those aggregates. And the Buddha wants you to see that those aggregates are very ephemeral, they're very quick to come, quick to go. And things that are so quickly changeable, you can't really place any hopes for any kind of solid happiness on them. Now to see that, you're going to have to develop the path. And an important part of the path is concentration. You start with mindfulness, like you're doing right now. You focus on the body in and of itself. In other words, the body as is right here, right now. You can focus on one aspect of it, like the breath. When you breathe in, know you're breathing in. When you breathe out, you know you're breathing out. You keep following the breath. In and out, in and out. And you try not to get distracted. Any thoughts that would deal with the world outside, you put them aside. And you develop three qualities of mind as you do this. One is you're mindful. In other words, you keep in mind what you're supposed to be doing. Then you're alert to make sure that you actually are doing it. Is the mind with the breath? Is the breath with the mind? As long as the answer is yes, you're fine. You keep that up. That's the beginning of the third quality, which is ardency. You try to do this well. If you find that the mind and the breath are separating, well, it's not so much they separate, the mind is what goes off. You bring it back. It goes off again, you bring it back again. While it's there, you try to make the breath as comfortable as possible, so that you want to stay here. And when the mind finally does settle down, with a sense of well-being, that's when you get into right concentration. When the mind is solidly in its concentration, then you can look at the things that you're clinging to. Starting with sensuality, your fascination with nice sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations. And ask yourself, when a sensual desire comes, when does it come? I want to be right there at the beginning. Because you want to see what sparks it in the mind. And the same principle applies with anger or any of the other qualities of the mind the Buddha calls hindrances, like restlessness and anxiety or doubt. You want to see when it comes, why it comes, what inside the mind sparks it, and then you want to see when it goes. You see these things coming and going. You establish the fact, yes, they are activities. Then the question is the value. What's the allure? Why do you like these activities? Then you look for the drawbacks. This is where you think about how these things are inconstant and stressful. If they're inconstant and stressful, why hold on to them? Why hold on to them as you or yours? Your sense of yourself, your sense of the world, your sense of what should and shouldn't be done, your sensual pleasures. When you can see that the drawbacks outweigh the allure, that's when you can let go. That's when you end your passion and aversion and delusion around those aggregates. Because you see that your ideas of the world and yourself really are made up of these aggregates, and the aggregates are not really that reliable. And if you hold on to them, there's a lot of suffering. That's when you lose any interest in craving for more. Because as you remember, the Buddha said there's something better when you can let go. That's how you fulfill the duties of the Four Noble Truths. And when you've done that, that's when you really know them. You've thoroughly comprehended your suffering. You've thoroughly let go of your craving, because you see it's not worth holding on to. You've fully developed the path to the point where you can let the path go, too. That's when you realize the end of suffering. So that's how we stop suffering. It's through knowing the Four Noble Truths, not just through knowing about them, but looking at the world in their terms. In other words, seeing whether something is suffering, okay, remember what's the duty? The duty is to comprehend it. If there's craving, the duty is to let it go. And all the elements of the path are things to be developed. So you see the truths, you see your experience in terms of those truths, and you do the duties. And then in doing the duties, that's when you really know them. You're learning by doing. Now you can read about, say, concentration, that's one thing. And you can get started on it, that's something else. But when you get really, really good at it, that's when you thoroughly know it. The more thoroughly you know your concentration, the more thoroughly you're going to know the other Four Noble Truths as well. So you don't have to look anyplace else. All these things are going to appear right here as you work on getting the mind trained. And it's right here that you find that you've been creating the causes for suffering. But it's also right here that you learn you can undo those causes, let go of those causes. And then the mind is free. Where is it free? It's free right here. So you don't have to look anywhere else. Just really get to know what's going on in your mind and the body right here as you stay with the breath. The breath is a good way to do this because you can't watch any past breath, you can't watch any future breath. All you have is the breath right here, right now. So as long as you're with the breath, you know you're in the right space. Then the next question simply is learning to see what's going on right here, right now. And you get better and better at that as you begin to realize that those aggregates that you were trying to understand are actually the things you do in order to get the mind into concentration. You've got the form of the body. You've got the feeling of ease that you're developing. You've got the perceptions, the images in your mind about how the breath goes through the body. Thought constructs, how you talk to yourself around the breath. And finally consciousness, which is aware of all these activities. It's all right here. So you're getting hands-on practice with all the different elements that go into suffering. And the more you know them, the more you can learn how to use them in such a way that you don't cause suffering until you can finally let them go. That's when you really know.